So in this video we'll be looking at the HSC source analysis question in section 1 in World War I. The first thing to think about in your response is time. You do get 20 minutes, it's recommended 20 minutes, although you should make sure that you take some time to read over your answer. Make sure it makes sense. It's so important for it to make sense, not to you, but to the marker. The marker really won't want to be looking over your paper again and again to try and make sense of it. So make sure that it makes the best sense possible. So what will you be asked? Basically, you get the same question every year, but with a little tweak. So for example, in 2014, you got asked how useful the sources would be in regards to studying the nature of trench warfare. In 2015, you got asked how useful the sources would be for attitudes towards a quick victory on the Western Front. In 2013, you were asked about the impact of total war on civilians in Britain and Germany. It's very important to take this into account. You must be very specific about how you answer the question in relation to the issue being asked. One of the questions I'm always getting asked is, should I analyse the sources one at a time or together? I have seen this question answered both ways, but I will say it's best to do it one at a time. Analyse each source individually. Analyse the whole of source A, and then analyse the whole of source B, and finally tie the two sources together at the end of your analysis using a sentence such as, in collaboration, these two sources are useful because, and go on from there. A very quick ending. It doesn't need to be big. The first thing you should consider is perspective. Discuss the significance of the author. Who is the author? Is it a soldier? Is it a commander? Is it a politician? Is it a civilian? If there's someone you know more about, bring that information in if you can. This is a good opportunity for you to show what you know. Think about tone and how they're writing, and does the tone have an impact on what they're saying and how it might affect your understanding. Some suggestions with tone are on the right with shock and awe, and while they're suggestions, there are plenty of others you can bring in. Think about the type of source it is. Are they writing in the time period? Are they a historian? If so, how might the period that they're writing from influence them? So it might be a little bit of a revisionist history, and that might be worth mentioning. So in regards to reliability, you should remember this. A source is rarely unreliable. However, some sources are more reliable than others. So here's some things to think about in regards to this part. Are the date and authorship details provided? What's the time period? Is it a primary or secondary source? And what are the advantages and disadvantages of these particular sources? Is there any bias evident? Bias isn't bad, but does it suggest that the author would benefit from stretching the truth in the source? Who are they talking to in the source? Does the source support what you already know of the time period? Try to bring in some outside knowledge if you can, and has there been a lot of editing in the source? And this is something you should really consider. Are there ellipses? Is there information left out? Is the image clear? Could it have been doctored? Or could the image have been staged? If there's a picture in a factory, people might look happy, but in reality they may not be. It's a moment in time that could be set up. And are all the quotes sourced? Usefulness is the next thing. And I have to be clear here. Is the source useful for the reasons specified in the question? So make sure you're referring back to the question in this part of your response. Be very specific about its usefulness in regards to the question. Does reliability and perspective impact the usefulness of the source? If it comes from a British politician, it's likely to show bias. This isn't a bad thing. It's just something that we need to consider as historians when we're reading it. What does this source add to a historian's understanding of the time period? What can we learn or prove from this source? A source with clear bias, like propaganda or a political cartoon, can still be very useful. For example, it can be very useful for studying popular opinions on the home front. Is usefulness limited? Does it leave out important information? For example, does it only show one side of the argument? This is something really worth considering. Just remember, analyse each source individually. Analyse the whole of source A, then analyse the whole of source B, and after that, tie the two sources together at the end of your analysis using a sentence like one below. Practice makes perfect, guys. I want to see responses coming to me. If you practice, I can help you and you'll end up looking like one of these happy folk.